Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters. Love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you. Sri Aurobindo arrived in Pondicherry in the year 1910, and after that, for 4 years, he did not write too much, but some of these early writings have now been published in the complete works of Sri Aurobindo as volume 12 under the title Essays Divine and Human. Now, in this collection, there are also a number of thoughts and aphorisms. I know it seems he used to get during this period some rare flashes of insight which could be expressed in a sentence or two. And he made a separate notebook for these and went on writing them. And there are more than 500 such thoughts and aphorisms available. And these also form a part of this volume, the volume titled Essays Divine and Human. And apart from that, these thoughts and aphorisms have also been published separately as a small little booklet. Now, among these thoughts and aphorisms, and there are also quite a few which are related to health and disease. And in this session, we shall talk about a few of these. With that little introduction, now let me turn to sharing the screen. These aphorisms have been numbered, and this is aphorism number 381. There are more than 500 of these, but not all are related to health and disease. For nearly 40 years, I believed them, here refers to doctors. For nearly 40 years, I believed them when they said I was weakly in constitution, suffered constantly from the smaller and greater ailments, and mistook this curse for a burden that nature had laid upon me. When I renounced the aid of medicines, then they began to depart from me like disappointed parasites. Then only I understood what a mighty force was the natural health within me, and how much mightier yet the will and faith exceeding mind, which God meant to be the divine support of our life in this body. Let's go over it a little slowly. For nearly 40 years, and he was about 40 then, which means that almost ever since he was born. For nearly 40 years, I believed them. Them means the doctors here. For nearly 40 years, I believed them when they said I was weakly in constitution, suffered constantly from the smaller and greater ailments, and mistook this curse for a burden that nature had laid upon me. So he took it as a given that since the doctors are saying so, it must be true. I have been born with a weak body, and therefore I'll keep suffering from these diseases off and on. When I renounced the aid of medicines, then they began to depart from me like disappointed parasites. So at a certain stage, he gave up using medicines for these diseases, and he found that these ailments, which kept recurring earlier, now seemed to have departed from him, left him like disappointed parasites. They didn't find any hospitable ground in his body anymore, and being disappointed, they just left him alone. Then only I understood what a mighty force was the natural health within me. So, then he realized that there was a mighty force at work in his body, and that was geared for health, not for disease. Then only I understood what a mighty force was the natural health within me, and how much mightier yet the will and faith exceeding mind, which God meant to be the divine support of our life in this body. So there's not only an inbuilt mighty force that is geared for health and keeps us healthy by and large most of the time, but then when something does go wrong, then there is also a divine support available in the body for recovering from these ailments. And that force is even mightier than the one that keeps us in health. And what that needs is the human will to harness that power and faith in it. So, with that strong will and faith in that mighty power, one can recover from disease and thereby harness the divine support that is available to us to keep us alive and healthy. Then only I understood what a mighty force was the natural health within me, and how much mightier yet the will and faith exceeding mind. This goes beyond the ordinary mind. Ordinary mind tends to be conditioned by the fact that if I'm not well, then I must go to a doctor, and it's medicines that will restore health. So that conditioning is a part of the mind. So one has to go beyond the mind, beyond this conditioning, and then only the mind will be able to use the power fully, because the mind is a manifestation of the divine, but it's an imperfect manifestation. The more we let it get illumined by that divine power within us, the more it will be able to work. And that requires both this will and faith. So when we do that, then one can exceed the normal capacities of the mind to influence the body. So then only I understood what a mighty force was, the natural health within me, and how much mightier yet the will and faith exceeding mind, which God meant to be the divine support of our life in this body. Drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it, but only if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. If that force can be made to work freely, the drugs are at once superfluous. So that is the beauty of it. Drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it, but only if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. So drugs do work, they do cure the body, but when? If their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit, which means that if the drugs are helping the inbuilt self healing mechanisms of the body, then they do work. But if they trouble or poison the body, which means if they are working against the inbuilt mechanisms for self healing, if they work in any way against what the body can on its own do, then the drugs don't work. So, drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it, but only if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. And in fact, that is very true. For example, if antibiotics do work in an infection, it is because they support the immune mechanisms of the body. In fact, there is no system of medicine which can afford to treat a disease by working against nature. And in that sense, every pathy is a naturopathy. And this is what is being expressed in this in a beautiful way. Drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it. That is, when they are harming us, when they are working against nature, but they do work if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. If that force can be made to work freely, drugs are at once superfluous. So, if the drugs have to only help the body, assist the body, assist the body in making better use of the self healing mechanisms within, which means either assist them by working in the same direction or create the type of environment in which the inbuilt self healing mechanisms can work better. Or say, for example, if a person has pain somewhere and we use hot fermentation, hot fermentation increases the flow of blood, and that greater blood flow means that those mechanisms for relieving pain, for going to the root of the pain, can work much better. So we are able to use these self healing mechanisms by this type of assistance. And if that is what we do, if that's what the drugs are doing, then the drugs are at once superfluous. Then why use the drugs at all? Let the body work at a slower pace on its own. Even that will cure us, which means that cure in the ultimate analysis does not depend upon drugs. It depends upon the self healing mechanisms of the body. For example, if the immune system is weakened, as happens in AIDS, and the person gets repeated infections, now no amount of antibiotics which are given for treating these infections will be able to keep the person alive indefinitely. Sooner or later, the person will succumb to one of these. And that's because the antibiotics are not enough if the immune mechanisms of the body have become weak. And even when the antibiotics are helping the immune mechanisms of the body, the very last germ in the body is eliminated by the immune system, not by the antibiotics. Antibiotics can either kill part of the germ population or they can reduce the rate at which these germs multiply, but the ultimate eradication, the elimination of the infection is because of the immune mechanisms of the body. So Drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it, but only if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. If that force can be made to work freely, drugs are at once superfluous. Now, why this force of the spirit? The spirit is more or less the same as the soul, and the soul is our divine essence. And the inbuilt self healing mechanisms of the body have been designed by the divine. So, in that sense, it is the force of the divine working through the spirit or our individualized soul, which is actually healing us, which is what is responsible for the cure. And the best of drugs or any other physical measures or any other thing that we do for disease is that which can assist these, support these, supplement these forces. That is the type of treatment that works. Anything which works against these inbuilt natural forces cannot work. Anything which works against these is troubling or poisoning the body, and that will not work. So, drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it, but only if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. So, the action of the drug is supported by the force of the spirit, or the drugs support the force of the spirit, but they have to work together. And if that force can be made to work freely, that is, without even using the drugs, then the drugs become superfluous. Disease is needlessly prolonged and ends in death oftener than is inevitable because the mind of the patient supports and dwells upon the disease of the body. Now, here's the mind body connection being emphasized, that if the person continues to think about the disease, the person is completely obsessed by the disease and whether he'll recover, when he'll recover, and so on and so forth, then this type of dwelling upon the disease with inadequate hope of recovery, then the disease is needlessly prolonged and may even end in death. So, disease is needlessly prolonged and ends in death oftener than is inevitable because the mind of the patient supports and dwells upon the disease of his body. For example, in case of a disease like cancer, where the person believes that the disease is incurable, and therefore this diagnosis may make the person dwell on this disease all the time, no matter what he's doing otherwise in the day. What stays in the background and in a very significant way is this concern about the disease, whether I'll recover at all, how long will I live, and what can be done about it. So he's dwelling upon the disease, and he's afraid of death. He's afraid of death because, in any case, everybody wants to live. Also, because he may have some worldly responsibilities which he feels that who will take care of them. So, in other words, his mind is revolving around the disease and the possibility of recovery, which he feels is very bleak. Now, if he continues to do that, it is more likely to end in death. People who do much better in diseases like cancer are those who treat it as an advance notice. Well, I know now I'll not live very long, so let me make the best use of whatever remains. And so instead of being obsessed with the disease, they are trying to do all those things which they had been postponing so far, all the interesting things that they wanted to do. And also, they start becoming more loving, and they start caring for others. So they're not obsessed with their disease, they're not obsessed with themselves. Instead, they feel that if the time available in life is short, why not now become a better human being? And, you know, after all, that is what will accompany me to the other world, the good deeds that I have done, uh, the reputation that I leave behind because of the type of person I am. And therefore, they become much better people. And in the process, the disease is pushed to the background. They're not so much concerned about the disease. They're not concerned too much about themselves either. Instead, now they're just trying to make the best use of the remainder of their life for spiritual growth, which is what becoming a better person essentially leads to, and bringing greater love into their life, being more forgiving by nature, being quick to apologize if they have hurt somebody now or sometime in the past. By doing all these things, they are pushing the disease in the background and giving the self healing mechanisms of the body work in peace and do their best. And these are the people who do better. So, even after getting a disease which is apparently incurable, like cancer, there is no fixed time at which the death has to be there. So, disease is needlessly prolonged and ends in death oftener than is inevitable. Doesn't have to happen as often as it actually does. And that happens why? Because the mind of the patient supports and dwells upon the disease of his body. It's not the medicine that cures so much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. Both are a clumsy substitute for the natural faith in one's own self power, which they have themselves destroyed. So, medicines do work sometimes, as we saw, but then it's not the medicine that cures as much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. So the person has to have faith in the doctor to whom he has gone. He has to have faith in the system of medicine which this doctor practices. And he has to have faith in the exact treatment that has been given. And on top of that, if he also has faith in the capacity of his own body to heal, which means that it is essentially the mind body connection at work. If the person thinks that I'll get better, he does get better. And he may think that he'll get better because he has faith in the doctor or because he has faith in the treatment that he is being given, and he has faith in the self-healing mechanisms of the body. So he has faith in the capacity of the body to heal itself. That, in fact, is the most important component. So that's what this thought or aphorism brings out. It is not the medicine that cures so much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. So the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine do more than the medicine by itself. It has been found that if a person who is depressed is given an antidepressant, half the effect is what we call is the placebo effect, which means that half the uh, half the sort of reduction in depression or half the improvement is because of the pharmacological action of the drug, but the other half is because the person thinks that this drug will relieve me of this depression. It's because he believes in it. And how do we know it? Because even if you give something inert, say a tablet which looks like the antidepressant, and the patient believes that it's an antidepressant, but actually it has something neutral like, say, sugar. So you give him that pill which looks like the antidepressant but is completely inert, it has no pharmacological action in the body. Then, just because the patient believes that this is a pill which is which will relieve me of my depression, the person does get relief to the extent of about 50% as compared to what he gets with a real antidepressant drug. So it's not the medicine that cures so much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. So the person has to believe in the doctor and the person has to believe in the medicine that he has been given. That works perhaps more than the medicine itself. Both are a clumsy substitute. Both means the patient's faith in the doctor and the patient's faith in the medicine. They are a clumsy substitute for the natural faith in one's own self power, that is, self healing power, the power of the body to heal itself, which they have themselves destroyed. Why has it been destroyed? Because the person does not have faith in it. The person thinks that the job has to be done by the medicine. So because he has faith in the medicine but not in the self-healing mechanisms of the body, these mechanisms, because the person does not believe in them, because these mechanisms are something that he does not trust, these mechanisms have been in a way destroyed, and the person has become dependent upon the medicine to harness even these inbuilt mechanisms. And why does one need this clumsy substitute? Because we are basically rooted in the physical. These mechanisms are something that we do not see. They are subtle in their operation. We are rooted primarily in the physical, something which is concrete and material. And the doctor in front of us is there in flesh and blood, and the medicine that he gives is something solid, something concrete, which we can swallow, and we know it has entered the body, and we have greater faith in it. So these are clumsy substitute because of our being rooted primarily in the physical. So we have to make these physical concessions to ourselves, even to use these subtle inbuilt mechanisms which work silently without our knowing them. So it is not the medicine that cures so much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. Both are a clumsy substitute for the natural faith in one's own self power, which they have themselves destroyed. While all that is true, Sri Aurobindo has nothing against medical science in itself or against the doctors who practice it. Medical science is well meaning and its practitioners often benevolent and not seldom self sacrificing. But when did the well meaning of the ignorant save them from harm doing? So the intentions of medical science are good, and those who practice medical science are kind, benevolent, and not seldom self sacrificing, which means it's not that occasionally they are self sacrificing, they are very often, very commonly, very frequently self sacrificing, which means they give up a lot to take care of the patient. They sacrifice their own comforts and a lot to be able to take care of the patient. So the intentions of medical science are good, and the doctors are nice people. But intentions by themselves do not necessarily prevent the person from doing harm or the system from doing some harm. Because what is done in good faith with the best of intentions is not necessarily going to do good. See, for example, parents love their children and everything that they do is well intentioned. But because of ignorance, because of ignorance about some basic principles of parenting, sometimes they end up doing things which may do harm to the child. For example, they may tell the child, if you do well in the exams, then I'll get you such and such thing. Now, it is like offering a bribe. Secondly, it is trying to indirectly tell the child that if you do something which is unpleasant, doing well in the exams or working hard, studying hard, now these are not burdens. These are something which the person should enjoy. Learning should be a joy. On one hand, we are making it look like a burden to be carried. And then what will be given to the child, that is shown as a source of happiness. And thirdly, we are teaching the child a type of bargaining that if you do something which is difficult or unpleasant, then you can in turn bargain and get something which is more pleasant, which gives you greater happiness. So we are doing so much harm to the child in spite of the parents actually being very well intentioned. So when did the well meaning of the ignorant save them from harm doing? So intentions alone are not enough. Love and concern are not enough. Being benevolent and being self sacrificing is not enough. Medical science is well meaning and its practitioners often benevolent and not seldom self sacrificing. But when did the well meaning of the ignorant save them from harm doing? God within is infinite and self fulfilling will. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments? Thou shalt find in the end that he exceeds the skill of a million doctors. So God within is infinite and self fulfilling will. God is infinite, that of course is axiomatic. And God's will always fulfills itself. The divine will has a way of prevailing. So God within is infinite and self fulfilling will. God within us. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments? So that infinite power for whom everything is easy, even things which appear very difficult to us are very easy. Why can't we leave to him without being troubled, without being miserable because of the fear of death? Why can't we leave to him with calm and entire faith? Faith associated with being at peace. Why can't we leave our the care of our ailments to Him, care of all our diseases to Him, but not as an experiment. Let me try this also. Let me try leaving it to the divine. Let's see what happens. Not with that type of an attitude. That's an experiment. You're trying to test the divine. You're doing it as an experiment. Let me see whether it works. If it doesn't work, then I can try something else. So, not as an experiment, but with a calm and entire faith. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments. If that calm and entire faith is missing, if we are doing it in the spirit of an experiment, we are not letting that force work. The force is still there, but we are imposing a barrier between it and ourselves because we are working at the level of the imperfect mind. We are letting the mind ask all these questions. We are letting the mind create doubts about the efficacy of this force. And because of that, it cannot work to its full capacity. And that's why not as an experiment. Unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments? Thou shalt find in the end that he exceeds the skill of a million doctors. After all, these millions of doctors are only partial manifestations of the same divine. And why not the one who is manifesting partly through these doctors? So that's why the skills of Dr. God exceed the skills of a million ordinary doctors. God, within his infinite and self fulfilling will, unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments. Thou shalt find in the end that he exceeds the skill of a million doctors. Let's go over these one by one once more. For nearly 40 years, I believed them when they said I was weakly in constitution, suffered constantly from the smaller and the greater ailments, and mistook this curse for a burden that nature had laid upon me. When I renounced the aid of medicines, then they began to depart from me like disappointed parasites. Then only I understood what a mighty force was the natural health within me, and how much mightier yet the will and faith exceeding mine, which God meant to be the divine support of our life in this body. So we are wonderfully made, and we are geared for health, and mechanisms for recovery from disease are also built within us. Drugs often cure the body when they do not merely trouble or poison it, but only if their physical attack on the disease is supported by the force of the spirit. If that force can be made to work freely, drugs are at once superfluous. So, drugs do help. They help quite often, but they help only if they work in sync, if they work in synergy with the inbuilt self healing mechanisms of the body. Disease is needlessly prolonged and ends in death oftener than is inevitable because the mind of the patient supports and dwells upon the disease of his body. So the mind has a very powerful effect on the body. It can maintain us in health, it can lead to disease, it can prolong disease, it can end in death. And on the positive side, the powers of the mind can help us recover from disease and postpone death. The will to live and the wish to die can both be very potent forces. It is not the medicine that cures so much as the patient's faith in the doctor and the medicine. Both, that is, the patient's faith in the doctor and the patient's faith in the medicine. Both are a clumsy substitute for the natural faith in one's own self power, which they have themselves destroyed. By not having faith in the self healing mechanisms of the body, we render it impotent, or at least we reduce its potency. Medical science is well meaning and its practitioners often benevolent and not seldom self sacrificing. But when did the well meaning of the ignorant save them from harm doing? Good intentions are not enough, benevolence is not enough. Making a sacrifice, being concerned, is not enough. God, within his infinite and self fulfilling will, unappalled by the fear of death, canst thou leave to him, not as an experiment, with a calm and entire faith, thy ailments? thou shalt find in the end that he exceeds the skill of 1,000,000 doctors. The body, which has been energized by the life force, which we call prana, is a combination that has the consciousness of the divine, and therefore it has infinite intelligence packed into the system, and it's capable of doing things which sometimes our limited mind, our conditioned mind, does not feel is possible. And therefore, miracles can happen, but those miracles require a calm and entire faith. And leaving it to that infinite intelligence packed in the body, leaving it to that, the care of the disease with entire faith, but not as an experiment. Let me just try it, not with that type of an attitude. And if we do that, we find that the skills or the curative capacity built into the body, the self healing capacity of the body, exceeds the skill of 1,000,000 doctors. So, if you see, there are basically three things which Aurobindo has touched in these crisp and pithy sentences. One is the mind body connection, which all systems of medicine recognized for very long. It got forgotten sometime in the early 20th century, a little after Sri Aurobindo was writing all this. It was roughly during the period, say 1920 to 1950, that modern medicine made some spectacular advances, like the antibiotics, the vaccines, and the vitamins, and the discovery of hormones like insulin, which changed the clinical picture of some very common killers of mankind, like infectious diseases, nutritional deficiencies, diabetes, and so on. Now, these spectacular advances worked with the help of treatments which did not require the assistance from the mind body relationship. And therefore, the mind body relationship got forgotten. But then emerged a newer set of diseases which started killing us at a later age, like heart disease and high blood pressure and complications of diabetes and cancer and stroke and so on. Now, these made us once again conscious of the mind body relationship. So, mind body relationship from the 1960s onwards started emerging again as a potent force, both for keeping us in good health and for recovery of disease. And that's what eventually led to the science which we now call psychoneuroimmunology, that is the mind working on the health and disease, the mind working on health and disease through the nervous and the endocrine systems. That is essentially what psychoneuroimmunology is. So that is one thing that comes emerges from this. And the second thing is the importance of the self-healing mechanisms of the body. When I was a medical student, the general uh, line of thinking was that self-healing mechanisms exist only for acute problems like common cold and diarrhea. When it comes to degenerative diseases like heart disease, the disease could at best stay the same. In general, it kept getting worse. But then came those pioneering studies of Dane Ornish in around 1990, uh, in which was shown that even chronic degenerative disease like coronary artery disease can go back, in the sense that instead of deteriorating, they can show improvement at the level of the blockage of the coronary arteries. Now that was a paradigm shift which showed that even for chronic disease, we have self-healing mechanisms available in the body. And this has been found to be true not only of coronary artery disease, but of many other chronic degenerative diseases. So self-healing mechanisms in the body seem to exist for just about every disease. And these can be uh, given the good conditions to work if we harness the powers of the mind body connection, the mind body relationship. So, the faith of the person in recovery, faith of the person in the doctor, in the system of medicine, in the treatment being given, all that is helping create those conditions which help these self healing mechanisms work to their best. And the third thing that has been brought out is that we can self exceed the normal capacity even of these self healing mechanisms. Why? Because the self healing mechanisms get their full play. They have the best chance to work to their full capacity only if we harness the infinite intelligence packed in the body to its fullest. And that is, if we believe in the capacity of the divine, which is all pervasive, which means that it is something that exists in every atom and every electron of the body. If it is all pervasive in nature, and that therefore that supreme consciousness of the divine is packed there, which in turn can translate into that infinite intelligence, which can keep us in good health and help us recover from disease, then these mechanisms work at their fullest. And therefore, apart from the faith in the doctor and the medicine and the faith in the self-healing capacity of the body, we also have to have faith that the self-healing mechanisms of the body can do much more than they normally do if we trust that infinite intelligence that is behind these self-healing mechanisms. Even the normal self-healing mechanisms are perhaps only a partial manifestation of what is possible. So if we don't let our limited mind condition ourselves to believing what is possible and what is not possible, then what seems to be impossible can become possible. That is what it is about. Thank you.